Hi guys, welcome back to episode 2 of Let's Agree to Disagree. Today we have a couple of new guests. We have Saif from Jeep Nation and we have Dean from Rami Automotive. And you'll all remember Reyes and myself, Dan from last time. Today here we're talking about IFS versus IFS independent suspension versus a rigid axle. Shall we start with Dean? Do you want to introduce yourself? Say hi.
Hi guys, my name is Dean. Like to drive in the sand and the rocks. I guess I favor both, if I'm honest. Yeah.
What about you, Saif?
My name is Saif from Jeep Nation. I personally mix and match, wherever there's no road, we drive. So it's sand, rocks, water, anywhere.
So who'd like to start? Who has strong opinions on?
So what we're talking about, as Dan said, is we're discussing the differences between a solid front axle and an independent front suspension. So the reason is that we want to talk about what is the pros and the cons of each of the systems, what is better, and then again, what would be preferable for each person on driving, whether off-road or on-road. So if I'm going to speak personal, I am, in terms of going off-road, it's always, without any doubt or any dispute, it's a solid front axle. For a lot of reasons, you get better articulation, you get a more rigid vehicle, you get an easier vehicle to modify. We're just scratching the surface. We'll get into details. With the IFS, it's a definitely more comfortable system when you're driving on road or a gravel road, let's say. But then again, does it give you that much capability when you're driving to pass obstacles? Out of experience and things I've seen, and I've been trying to judge these cases like equally on a certain terrain where a certain vehicle with a solid front suspension solid front axle passed, and another one with an IFS, and I can see huge difference on how each system is manipulating, is crawling, let's say, on these obstacles, especially if you're talking about crawling. And again, there is a lot of cases where they're saying that, but for sand dunes, it's still better to go for IFS. I still disagree with that. Still, a solid front axle gives you a better edge. The thing is that you have a certain clearance which is maintained the whole time. It's very rigid. But then again, for example, let's say you're hitting a dune. When you have a solid front axle, the whole system, when it gets an impact, it works together. So that clearance is still there, stable. But then again, with an IFS, what happens is that you have two separate components. The moment that it hits, those will go up, and then the bottom of the vehicle will hit.
Becomes a V.
Yeah, exactly. So I really don't see why would someone prefer, under any circumstances, an IFS for off-roading.
I think it's more about the comfort. They look for the comfort both on-road and off-road. That's one of the big differences. Like Ray said, basically, a lot of these differences you see when you go rock crawling. You can see that you can see the flexibility, you can see the tires going up and down, playing smoothly. You see the car basically driving smoothly. But when it comes to IFS, you can see the car swinging. One tire is in the air, there's no balance. So it's all about the people. I think a lot of people prefer the IFS due to comfort, on road and off road, speed as well, while driving in the sand, because it's independent. I basically agree with Reyes that the solid is much better, as a personal opinion and as personal experience with the solid. Modifications also, you can go way higher, suspension kit, bigger tires with the solid. So in my personal opinion, I have to agree with Reyes that I don't see why people would like to go with IFS. I personally prefer solid. See, even I have to use this. Look at the solid. Look how nice. Look how smooth.
Well, I think Dean would have a good opinion on that because Dean has been working on a lot of vehicles. So
Well, I think with your point regards to this V thing when hitting a dune with a IFS versus a rigid axle, I would almost guarantee that if you had to measure the distance between your axle and the ground, parked on the street, let's say, and measure FJ, for instance, which has been fully collapsed in the front, between the belly plate and the ground, it must probably be the same. Because you have bump stops stopping too much up travel, right? So the wheels cannot go up, over, and above there's no ways that the belly plate will touch the ground, let's say. So I think in that regards, it's the same. I don't think there's any less.
You're talking about stock bump stops or modified bump stops? Or just in general?
In general. So if you had to take a Jeep and hit a dune and a FJ and hit a dune, if you were able to measure it somehow, I guarantee that there would not be much difference between either axle on the sand, because that doesn't change, just with tire size maybe compressing, but I think chassis-wise, there wouldn't be much difference between those two.
So why would someone want an IFS? I mean, both Reyes and Saif have said that they would choose a rigid axle. Why would someone choose an independent axle?
You've got it keeps all the geometry a lot better, in my opinion. With the Jeeps, you have the track bars obviously connecting the chassis to the axle, and when you have these quick up and down movements, the axle is moving to a degree left and right, because that's swinging on like a pivot, right? So you get this sideways move, although you don't feel it. I mean, there was a Dodge Ram that we used to work on, and the Gladiators have this issue because the front track bar goes chassis axle, and the rear track bar goes chassis axle. So when you're going over a speed bump, they go left and right, and you feel this.
You feel a bit of
left and right shake in the car.
So wheel alignment, basically.
Not really wheel alignments. The differences of height, and when the axles are going up and down, one is pulling the axle right left, and the rear is pulling the axle left right. So you get this sort of sideways shimmy feeling. In the if they were both the same, it would be less. But we had a Dodge Ram actually with a big lift kit that we were working on, and on a speed bump, if you went really fast, you could noticeably feel the rear axle move left and right. It would be quick, but you could feel it. So I think in terms of keeping everything straight and where it should be, IFS is far better. Unless if you're going to have a JT or whatever car, you could do the 3-link or 4-link at the back, which eliminates the track bar, and then you've eliminated that problem altogether at the rear.
Me personally, I think it's not a question that a lot of people will ask themselves before buying a car or an off-road vehicle. It's not like they're considering saying, "Oh, do I go IFS or do I go rigid?"
Do I like a Jeep?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's more like, do I like this vehicle or not? So I don't think it's so much of a question that someone might want to know before they buy a vehicle, but after they buy a vehicle, they might realize with either that it has some benefits and has some
drawbacks, yeah.
right? So the good thing, like Ray has mentioned and Saif mentioned, with a rigid axle is there's a lot more room for modifications to be done compared to independent axle. Independent axle, you really have to start spending a lot of money to change pretty much all the components.
And it's tougher.
Yeah.
Solid's always tougher.
You mean in strength?
Yes.
It's tougher.
Yes.
Well,
You don't have a lot of small components all around. It's basically...
So that's what I was getting onto. If you want to achieve a really high level of performance with an IFS, you need to actually invest a lot more than you would have if you were the rigid axle. So for an average off-roader, definitely a rigid axle, in my opinion, would be the way to go. And that's how, to be honest, majority of the vehicles we will see that are like heavily modified are rigid axles. You will obviously get the FJs and a few of the Raptors and things with different suspensions, but they can't achieve the same level of modification that Jeep can.
See, technically, I think people won't... This is not something that would, be a deal breaker for someone mainly who's starting to off-road. People would go for a car they prefer, and then based on what it has and what's built in it, then they would adjust and adapt to what it's on and work along with it. But when you come to detailed off-roaders or advanced or experienced off-roaders, then they would go look for these little details based on what they are what they're looking for, where they're looking to go, whether they're looking to go rock crawling, extreme rock crawling, basic rock crawling, speed. Speed. People like to go for speed and drifting and all that in the desert. Or if you're looking for speed and comfort in the speed, then people will lean towards the IFS. If people are looking to go extreme rock crawling, then they would definitely choose the solid axle due to comfort again.
So that brings me on to the next question is, and I had this when they released the Bronco. So they've released the Bronco and they've put an independent suspension on the front, and a lot of people, and just exactly as you said, if they're interested in rock crawling, are they now not going to buy the Bronco?
Technically, the idea, or what's been spoken around is Bronco competing with Jeep. With the IFS, I see it in a whole different category. It has nothing to do with Jeep.
But it fits. They're targeting the same consumer, right? They're targeting.
Well, they're targeting the same consumer, but a lot of the consumers are looking to do
overlanding and whatever.
Exactly, overlanding, mountains.
I think capability-wise is what they were referring to, as capable as a Wrangler, because I think a Wrangler is deemed the sort of the benchmark, when it comes to an off-road vehicle. It can do everything well. Whereas a Raptor, you're not going to go rock crawling with it, obviously, because you're going to get stuck in 5 minutes.
You can carry the wood if you're
But that's
going
great
to
in the
a
sand. So yeah.
See, even with the towing, when you have a solid axle, towing capability is tougher.
That's why all the trucks, they have a rear solid axle.
Exactly,
They don't have
exactly.
an independent rear suspension.
So Bronco going for the IFS, I honestly, personally, I don't see it as the best idea or the best
It might
decision that
compete
they
with
have
other
taken.
vehicles in the market.
Exactly.
If you're talking about competition,
Exactly.
we're not talking about the system. If we're talking about competition, it's in a category for other vehicles, but it's not going to be for.
But
solid.
what I mean is what
We have-
what people are targeting and what people are seeing is a whole different image right now. It changed.
Yeah, I love it. If you're talking about people that are looking now for, I want an off-road vehicle that is comfortable to drive off-road. You might, yeah. I mean, an independent front suspension will help in that part, because if you're driving on a not flat surface, but when you're driving on a rigid surface, but it's mostly, I mean, on high speed, yeah, an independent front
Exactly.
suspension
Therefore, again,
will
consumer.
definitely do a lot of. And even one time I had this quick discussion on social media with a guy that was too pro IFS, and the first thing that he says that in King of Hammers that the IFS is dominating, but no, it is not dominating. They're actually having issues, and most of the vehicles now, and even the irony is that a lot of people that buy an independent front suspension, when they get to that point of level where they want to do more, they modify it to connect the front and rear in order to have the solid front axle
a
effect.
live axle, yeah.
So basically, again, off-road, solid front axle, IFS, I mean, it's good on-road.
Daily use.
Yeah, it's good for high-speed off-roading. If you want to go to a dune and spend the day going up and down and do nothing else, then yeah, that would work. But if you want a fully capable off-road vehicle that would conquer any terrain, then definitely the choice would be a solid front axle.
Adding to all that, putting all that aside, solid has been tested for a long, long time. It's guaranteed and it's been used for a very long time, long years with off-roading, with all-terrain, with all terrains basically.
Yeah.
So, considering tested, solid is always on top of that.
So, Dean, since you worked on a lot of vehicles, how would you compare modifying a solid front axle versus an IFS in terms of number one, cost, and in term of, number two, the difficulty of actually applying that modification in terms of labor hour, amount of components being used to achieve a properly functional modification?
I mean, on a JK, for instance, for an FJ, the most standard sort of lift, or the highest you can go without going absolutely wild, is about 3 inches. So if you can compare a 3-inch lift from a FJ to a JK, I think the components on the JK would actually most probably be more, to be honest. Because on an FJ you don't have track bars.
Okay.
On an FJ you've got 2 front struts, 2 upper arms, rear springs. That's it.
But if I'm talking about personal experience, I did install 3-inch on my Jeep, and for a while until I decided to modify, but all I did was the lift, the shocks, and I had a couple of relocation brackets for the track bar.
Yeah, you can go
That's
for
it.
relocation brackets and you don't have to change
That's
the drive
it. I
shaft.
mean, I
until
didn't
a
have
later
to
stage,
do-
basically. Yeah.
Later on, I decided I want a heavier.
You can
duty
live with the drive shaft
and
for a
later
while.
on, I
You
decided
can live
I
with the
want-
drive shaft for a while, but I think component-wise, it's roughly the same. There's not wild difference.
You're just cutting the lifetime of the drive shaft.
Yeah,
that's basically
yeah,
it.
this is true. I mean, if you're going to be lifting an FJ to that height, I think you do put a lot of strain on the CVs. I think that's a weak point on any IFS car. When you start lifting it so much, you pop CVs and break things, you know. And I think also if you're going to do a decent sort of off-the-shelf lift kit for either of these vehicles with good shocks and say matching shocks, Fox 2.5 DSCAs on either, I think roughly it's going to come to the same amount of money. Good set of shocks, good arms, good shocks and springs on the Jeep. You know, I think you're going to look at much of a muchness cost.
In terms of labor hours, you're talking about a number of components. So, and when I say as well number of components, it doesn't mean an item as a whole. You know, for example, I don't mean a spring and a shock. In a solid front axle, it will be a spring and a shock.
Correct.
But then again, in an IFS, it will be a spring and a arm and some connections and all of these things that will add.
Little small.
Yeah.
The strut and our arm, or just the strut even. It's pre-assembled, goes in, you know. So I think components and costs, I think it's pretty level. There might be more things to break and go wrong, but in terms of installation, that's what he's saying. It's not much different.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good point as well. So
It's also hard. It's more complicated for maintenance. I believe that's an IFS because you have a lot of components in there. You need to go with details, much more than a solid axle.
well, this goes as well to what Dan said. Is there
Yeah.
more components expected to break on an IFS?
I think you've got a lot less. I mean, you've got bushes that go obviously, but it happens on the Jeeps as well. But I think the bushes which take all the hard knocks, I think there's less on an IFS that wear out quickly than you would have on a Jeep.
Interesting. Well, from your experience, it's interesting because my understanding is totally different. That they actually have more components on an IFS to be worried about than on a solid front axle. Solid front axle is basically a straightforward bolt-on item that you install and life goes.
Exactly.
But then again, on IFS, you
Even
have
in a worst case scenario, if it breaks, just replace the whole.
how many screws and bolts that you have to connect in order to keep it well, and then number of connections increase, which means number of expecting or stresses on these points are more, which can one failure can cause all the rest to fail together.
I mean, you've got holding your wheels on basically for Wrangler, you've got 8 bushers just in the front holding the axle on. On IFS, you've got 8, 2 uppers, 2 lowers, left and right. You've got 2 ball joints, upper and lower, same as a Jeep. You've got tie rod ends on the FJ or IFS car. You've got a tie rod and a drag link, so there's actually one more component on the Jeep. Steering related components. So I think components wise, it's also very close, if not even maybe a bit more on the Jeep, because you've got an extra arm, a drag link. You've got a track bar, which the FJ doesn't have. You know, and there's no death wobble in IFS cars.
Yeah, that's true.
You have to.
That's something we all love.
Yeah, we all love it.
Yeah, it's what makes life exciting.
Exactly. The life of the adventure.
On living on the edge, near death wobble experience. It's still yeah, but I'm a survivor of a death wobble
Me
case,
too.
so
Me too.
I mean,
On a highway.
yeah. It likes coming on a highway actually. I think it prefers to show up on a highway.
No, and then you man up and you say, I'm not gonna call it recovery, I'm gonna drive it. So what do you prefer personally? What would you go for?
Depending on what you want to use the car for. If you're a rock crawling fanatic, live axle all the way. But I think for a daily use, desert fun, IFS for me.
So you choose the more comfortable road.
Technically, honestly, if I want to drive very long distance, I'll go for an IFS. It's more comfortable.
If we're talking facts, yes, IFS is definitely a more
Yeah,
comfortable
honestly,
vehicle to
with
drive.
my solid driving all the way to Oman, is it the best?
Look, I really don't think that this can be used as a criteria because we live in a region where actually roads are very good. I mean, we don't live in one of these countries where you have a rough road driving. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you have an experience. I mean, I've been living in Egypt all my life, so
Yeah.
I mean, roads is an off-road experience in
A
there.
solid
so-
axle is not the best there. Huh?
Yeah, exactly.
I a few Eids ago, I went to Oman. We had to come back because we had to come back to work, so it was a bit short for us anyway. I can't remember, 1,200 clicks maybe
Yeah.
in my Jeep. 3-inch on 37s.
The yellow school bus.
I will never do it
Yeah,
again.
it's cool, but-
Yeah.
Not if you paid me to take a Jeep up there again. I would never do it again.
It really made a difference. I mean,
It's terrible, man.
the roads are basic flat. There is nothing that you would be actually.
Yeah, but it's as easy as those. It's as easy as those. You know those little bumps that are on the road before the speed bump. It's like jumping like that.
I think we're dragging from the point. You specified on a Jeep. Jeep has been basically saying aerodynamics since 1941. So I don't believe that this is a criteria for on-road usage. I mean, you will beat that, of course, I know, but so yeah, basically you don't have aerodynamics to compare or use it as a criteria for a vehicle on highways. But then again, if we're talking about solid front axle on a highway on a flat, properly, perfectly paved road, on a let's say a Nissan Patrol, the Super Safari, they still produce these with solid front axle. I personally drove it from Muscat all the way to
A patrol?
yeah
Oh, that I would do it a patrol.
yeah
Happily.
because the aerodynamics. It's not because of the solid front axle.
And doesn't have a fiberglass roof and
Yes, again, it's because of the aerodynamics, the structure of the vehicle for usage on highways. But it's not because of solid front axle.
So to bring it a bit back, you just mentioned doing a long trip. When you're doing a long trip, a long overlanding trip, one thing you always think about is if something goes wrong, something breaks. From experience, a rigid axle is much easier to repair if something goes
Anywhere, exactly. It's easy to repair anywhere.
as compared to an IFS.
Faster repair, easier repair. You can find the parts technically much more available than the IFS anywhere.
If you have a suspension issue with an IFS or you have a axle issue with
what
an
suspension
IFS,
issue are we talking about?
I don't know. You damage some component while off-roading. Traditionally, a solid axle is much easier to repair
So with that.
on the go. Would you agree?
I would say so, yes. We were in Liwa a couple of years ago and the guy was not paying attention, went into a ditch and he snapped the pitman arm off in the middle of Liwa. You have no chance of, then you're done. You're done. You call the 15 grand recovery to come get you because you got no steering. You know, it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare. And then, you know, if you do get a spare part, you have to change your steering box, which is a shit job. If you broke a tie rod end, you go get the little tie rod end from the spare part shop, go put it on. Your alignment will be whack, but you'll be able to drive out, you know, yeah. So I think it's all relative how bad the knock is, you know.
Yeah. So again, preparing for a long trip, you could then argue that it's much better to be on a rigid axle than an IFS.
I would say IFS.
You think so?
Yeah, because if you want to keep, let's say for instance, spares, and you're going to go long distance, you're going to keep a track bar, a tie rod, and a drag link in the Jeep, which is huge things, right?
But not difficult to change.
No, not difficult to change.
But on an IFS it would be, wouldn't it?
Not necessarily, no.
So let's consider the same thing with an IFS if you're driving.
2 tie rods.
That's it.
You got no track bar, you got no drag link. Everything that controls your steering is 2 little rods. You know? Just
So why isn't Jeep putting an IFS on a Jeep, on a Wrangler?
Because I think one of the main reasons is that They want it to be an all-terrain vehicle with the flexibility of the tires. So going extreme off-roading, you can't really do what a Jeep can do.
But are they really
Extreme
building? Are they really building the Wrangler for the extreme, or with the Bronco? For
No,
example,
but
they're
with the main difference is with the solid axle, you can actually you do lose some of the comfort, you do lose some of the advantages of the IFS, but you can still do anything with your Jeep. Literally, have you seen the flexibility of a Jeep on rocks? How flexible it can go? Can an IFS do that? No way.
That's,
No way.
that's what the Bronco's trying to prove.
Let's go to Moab. Let's go to Moab in the States.
Okay.
Can an IFS, a car with an IFS, do what a Jeep can do in there? With all the flexibility they do?
So it could. Might not be able to flex as much, but I'm sure it could do the
It's be swinging in
the
there.
same
It's be
obstacles.
swinging there.
It gets over. It gets over. If it's dancing with tires in the air and you get over the same obstacle, you're over. You know.
The comfort on the Jeep going and the trust you have that your Jeep is gonna make it flexible, goes up and down. It's just easy. So I think that's one of the main reasons why Jeep are still insisting on not changing to IFS, especially on the Wranglers.
I mean, I think if you had to put two cars head to head, FJ for example, and a Rubicon, I guarantee you they will both be able to do the same things.
I don't think so.
No.
Yeah.
No.
No, so again, is it in an extreme case or in an
extreme
average
case.
case?
If you had to go up a rocky trail, if you had to do, I think FJ.
I'm not saying Wadi Shauka off-roading.
No. Let's talk about that. No. I totally disagree. And that's what I said. I have experience in that. I don't have a Rubicon. I have a
I'm
Sahara.
talking stock vehicles now, from the factory, showroom.
The only modification in terms of gears that I have is the limited slip differential. Compared to an LJ, it does have a diff lock. Yes. Correct. So he has an edge over what my vehicle is capable of.
But we're talking Rubicon.
They are both-
We're talking full option
He's
cars.
talking in his case.
I'm talking in my case, which
okay.
is a Sahara
Yeah.
and an LJ. This is number one. Number two, they have the same amount of lift that I have. So basically, there is no edge of me having more clearance.
Okay.
So we're equal. I'm talking about an area where we went for, basically it was a mountain area, and then there is the riverbed which has a bit of crawling. I did my part, I crawled it. Yes, I do have experience, and I was able to pass without one single scratch. Nothing hit the bottom of my vehicle. My vehicle articulated through each and every obstacle without any issue. Because the moment that one of the tires are lifted, you have the articulation, the whole vehicle gets elevated. It helps as well approach angle, departure angle, all of these things. I pass the obstacle. I personally go back to spot for that FJ that came after me. So I'm giving him all my knowledge as well because I want him to pass. I don't want to be about it. I really genuinely, he wants to experience how to do this.
leave an FJ
So I came back. The person has a skid plate, metal bumper. So basically it's not stock. So he has better approach angle. It's not capable to do what a Jeep can do. The moment that he starts to articulate, the IFS depends in a big part on the
Tire goes in the
distribution
air.
of weight. No. It didn't get to that point. It wasn't that much of a high obstacle. But the fact is, the moment that one tire started to go up on one of the obstacles, there is a weight distribution factor that affects the IFS, not
Exactly.
how it affects a solid front axle.
Correct, yeah.
So the moment that his tire went on the obstacle, and I genuinely tried to help him not to touch the bottom of his vehicle. It was from front all the way from under the engine until almost his rear axle, where all I can hear is because the vehicle was not capable to articulate in a proper manner in order to pass an obstacle. So no, I disagree when you say yes, an FJ can pass it. And he had to hit, and then he had to reverse and take a proper angle in order to pass it. And that's when I had him to pass.
And then you need to
But no,
consider.
it is not. That means that it is not capable of entertaining such terrains. And even if you go online, let's say try to find vehicles, let's say in the US, because US they are more of a rock crawling society community than we are in here. You'll find that if someone goes to that level of being, super into getting into the crawling with an FJ, you'll find him ending up adding a solid component that connects his front and rear tires in order to give him the same effect of a solid front axle.
And
So
then
no,
you need to
you
consider
will
that a lot
never
of that
get-
components.
I don't know if we can mention into details, but even the Bronco is introducing a sway bar disconnect system, and basically they're doing that because the only vehicle that has that is a Rogue.
Yeah.
So they want to show that we're doing it, and they added an extra option where you can do that, disconnect that under load, which is really a nice idea. Under pressure, under load.
Where it's under load.
So basically, if it's already under load, you press the button.
Okay.
But then again, when you look at the video of how that works, if a Rubicon goes through an obstacle where it starts to articulate, yet it's under load, but already the system is articulating. It's how can I say that? It's adapting to the terrain in order to pass obstacles. What happened on the introduction of Bronco when they put the moment of videoing the system when it operates? So basically, it was going on an obstacle. So there was one tire which was under load. So the other one was elevated from the terrain.
Okay.
The moment that he pressed, the tire just dropped. But nothing within the vehicle changed in terms of how it articulates or adapted to the terrain. So you could see that the skid plate or that front part of the vehicle is still touching the ground. It only reached down in order to give
So
him
just the
traction.
travel distance of the tire.
Yeah, so only added travel distance, but on a solid front axle you get, like, yes, you are in the end, it's the same clearance which you get from the axle, but then again with the approach angles that you have, every other component in the vehicle is elevated in order to pass the obstacles in a more efficient manner, let's say. So no, I mean, an IFS will never get to that level of
Flexibility.
of articulating the same way of a solid front axle will ever.
But doesn't that just change your driving style? It might not give you the same, but you can, like you said, your friend in the FJ, he still got past the obstacle, right? Maybe he had to drive a slightly different way.
Yes, like,
He had to drive. He probably had to drive an easier, less.
you can probably pass
Rocky way.
any obstacle with any vehicle. I mean, you can see those videos that we have with someone actually moving the bumper of a Tida and going into the desert.
Yep.
In the end, it's the driver on. But the point is it a system which is efficiently made for an all-terrain experience, or is it a system that is limited to, let's say, 1 to 3, but no, 4, 5, 6 is out of its reach?
Again, I go back to the point why one of the main points why Jeep haven't changed to an IFS, specifically in a Wrangler, so that it can go on all terrain comfortably. Well, not as on the street, not as comfortable as an IFS, but it can literally go on any terrain.
Again, we're limiting ourselves to Jeep. So let's go to Nissan. So the new Patrol is an all independent suspension front and rear. But then again, when they want to make an off-road vehicle or maintain the legacy of the Patrol as it is, they are producing a solid front axle Super Safari vehicle. Although they could have, let's say, reproduced the vehicle with the same mechanical specs in terms of engine and whatsoever, and for that extra comfort, they could have, if it's a more efficient system, they could have added an independent front suspension on that, right? But no, they should.
I think the only place in the world that still makes the Y61 is for UAE.
Most probably, yeah, but
Nowhere
because
else in the world.
Yeah, I think they want to make it for here.
not UAE, I mean, I think it's
And the Gulf region.
I mean,
region,
yes, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because the region, which means that it is a more
Because
efficient
it's mostly
system for
used, yes.
off-roading. Because they will use it for off-roading more than using it for just on-road or regular use. That's why they reissued. They made sure to, and then throughout history, even, I mean, again, if we're talking about sand, all the vehicles that has that extra edge of capabilities, you'll find them the ones with the solid front axle. The Toyota Land Cruiser Roba, how do they call it? The
Jana.
Yeah, I mean, it's a solid front axle still, and it's a very
reliable.
capable and it's very reliable vehicle.
Yeah, no, reliability aside, that's not what we're getting into, but I'm pro IFS.
Again, as we mentioned, we're all based on experience and based on preference.
But then you did mention that you're as well into IFS.
I said if money was an option, I would consider IFS, yes.
Yeah, but I mean, elaborate.
Well,
What would you do?
there's things that you, for example, in a rally, you'd always go with an IFS because of the speed, for its ability to go over terrain quickly, right?
For speed, yes, for speed.
For speed.
Like let's say off-road rally.
But you could not compete at that level with a rigid axle. As
On a high speed, yes.
On high
No,
speed.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Of course.
So just like you were saying on rock rolling, you can't compete with a rigid axle. For high speed, for rallying, you cannot compete with an IFS.
True.
That is if you're talking about a competition level. But as the capability of a vehicle on a solid front axle, it can conquer both. But an IFS cannot conquer both with the same efficiency.
And that's the point, right? Is coming back to it is, and this was my view on it, is if money is no option,
You'd buy both.
I have one for each time. But for an average person, which is what we're talking about. We're talking about people who are in our region, people who are like us. An IFS it's not worth, if you want to get to that level of performance.
Yeah.
A rigid axle and a Jeep is much better, which is why I have a Jeep, which is why I have a rigid axle, and I would not change that. But there are some cases like rallying style, like if you do want to go over terrain really fast, if you do want to take some jumps, you can't really do that reliably.
Well, see, you can still do it with a solid axle. You can still do it with speed, considering you have a good suspension kit. You have it fully rigid from down. Like most of us, I'm talking from my experience. I have everything rigid, everything modified from under the car. So basically, I can jump. I can go on high speed, not as high, not rally style high.
Exactly, that's my point.
Yeah. But I can still jump. I can still go on speed. Like I've done wadis at a speed of 80, 90. I've done it.
This is my only point. You're asking me. I'm a little bit pro IFS. Is this because I love rally as well. Mm-hmm. If I was ever to do a rally, I would want an IFS suspension.
Like if I want to go on a rally, I'm not going to take my Jeep there. No.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's not as clear cut. Again, you come back to it. Is if we're talking about off road, we're talking about in the region. Yeah, of course, rigid axle, no question. But Dean's convinced me a little bit. I didn't know as much as he mentioned. It's again bias, and it's again I drive a Jeep, so I don't know as much about IFS.
So Dean, expect a call after this.
But I would not, like I said, I would not change. I would not go to an IFS suspension. I would not change to an FJ. I would not change to a Bronco, to be honest. In my opinion.
Okay. Well, Saif, I think you cleared your point that you're pro
solid.
Pro solid. I'm pro solid. Dan, if he has more money, he will get both.
Just swap them out.
So in conclusion, basically, we agree to disagree. I believe that I will go for a solid axle based on preference and trial and my own driving style. Reyes?
Yeah, I'm always pro solid front axles, and I believe all the vehicles that always want to maintain that off-roading legacy, they always keep on reproducing on solid front axle, and that includes whether it was Jeep, you're talking about the Nissan Patrol, you're talking about even the Suzuki Jimny, which even the new one is coming with a solid front axle, yet they could have done an IFS, especially it's a small vehicle. But in order to have a capability, they still maintained to having that off-road capability by keeping the solid front axle in there. So yeah, I mean, off-road, it's definitely a solid front axle. On-road, daily use, high speed, I've never been against that. The IFS would be a better option for these kind of things. But then again, as I said, it's not an all-terrain conqueror, which for me doesn't mean that it's that good in order to prefer it over a solid front axle. And Dan?
Yeah, in conclusion, I agree with you guys. I would also stick with a rigid axle for personal use. I would unlikely ever switch to a IFS, but it has some cases, like you mentioned, it can be a bit more comfortable. and I still think that it can conquer obstacles. We'll have to agree to disagree on what type of obstacles it can conquer. But I'm on the fence a bit. Personally, I would stick, but if you ask me my opinion on either, I wouldn't be able to tell you which way to go.
I'm still IFS. If you haven't changed my mind.
We tried.
I mean, yeah, I think, in my personal opinion, I think IFS car covers a far greater range of capabilities than a live axle can. From school runs to off-roading to its limitations, where it can do everything quite well, whereas a Jeep drives like on the road, you know, but it's good in the rocks. So I think, you know, that's what I have to say. I think.
So I guess it's a wrap for today's episode. Solid front axles against IFS. I believe we have agreed to disagree, 3-1 today. But or I think it's 2.5.
2.5.
It's 2.5 to 1.5. So yeah, thanks for watching, and see you guys next Tuesday.
Alright guys, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment below that. Comment. Don't forget to comment. Thank you.
Now wink.